And our second scripture lesson is picking up from the previous lesson from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, the story of what is popularly known as the story of the prodigal son. Then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. And when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you grew up in the church, you know this story all too well. This story is kind of like the It's a Wonderful Life or the Princess Bride. We see these movies and we can quote them forwards and backwards. This story is kind of like one of those movies. And throughout the history of sermons and preaching, preachers have tried to present this story in fresh and novel ways, such as presenting this story or telling this story from the viewpoint of the patient father, or telling the story from the viewpoint of the younger runaway son, or the viewpoint of the older angry brother. About the only viewpoint we haven't heard from is the fatted calf. Though chronologically I am a younger brother, I can really understand and relate to the older brother. I can understand his righteous anger all too well at seeing how his younger, wayward, runaway brother is so lavishly welcomed back by his dad, a man who spends a huge chunk of the remaining inheritance on a party that included a fatted calf, which would have been highly expensive. Just in case we missed the point, this means that the older brother is footing the bill for his younger brother's party. When I was about 9 or 10, I ran away from home, or at least I tried to. I think I was mad at my mom about something, and I just decided to take off walking down the road, not telling anyone where I was going, not telling anyone that I had left the house. Like most runaway children, I had no idea where I was going or no idea what I would do when I would get to where I thought I was going. I just wanted away from my mom, my dad, my family. I think I was maybe about a mile or so from the house when my brother pulled up in his car. He rolled down the window, and in those days, this was rolling down windows. And he said, "Mom has been worried, and she sent me to come look for you and to come get you and to bring you back home." And I got in the car and we drove home. I don't remember if I had this parable in mind as we drove home that day. But when I got home, I did not get a robe or a ring or a fatted calf. I got a fatted belt. Apparently, children who ran away in the Bible got a much better deal than children who ran away in Wake County. Part of the challenge of this parable is that we know it too well. If you were asked to retell this story from memory, I bet a lot of us could do it. We could probably do it, even though we might leave out a few details, which is part of the problem. Because when it comes to a lot of biblical stories, many times the details are vitally important. Years ago, I remember reading about a New Testament scholar named Mark Allen Powell who did an interesting experiment with his class. He had about 12 students in his New Testament class read this parable, the parable of the prodigal son, and then to close their Bibles and then to turn to a partner in the class and retell the story from memory. It's interesting that none of his students, none of the 12 students in this first initial experiment mentioned the famine in verse 14. The famine which triggers the son's eventual return. And Powell found this omission quite interesting, so he organized the same experiment on a larger scale across the campus with about 100 people. He had 100 people read this story and retell it from memory as accurately as possible, remembering as much as they could. Now, this group was campus-wide. It was racially, ethnically, socioeconomically diverse, religiously diverse. Out of the 100 participants, only 6 of them mentioned the famine. The ones who omitted the famine from their retelling had only one thing in common. They were from the United States. Later, Powell had the opportunity. He was lecturing over in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and he decided to gather 50 students and do this same experiment with Russian students. This time, 42 out of 50 students remembered the famine, remembered that detail when they retold the story from memory. This was intriguing to him, and he later realized why this was. Because famine is embedded in the history of the Russian people. From 1921 to 1941, the Russian people experienced 3 major famines. One caused by a drought, one due to Stalin's evil regime, and one due to the Nazi German siege of St. Petersburg, which resulted in a 3-year famine. These 3 famines, collectively resulted in the deaths of millions of people. Based solely on cultural location, Americans and Russians disagreed about what they considered a minor detail, a plot device that highlighted the real problem. For Americans, the real problem was the prodigal son's wasteful spending. Russians, on the other hand, saw the prodigal son's wasteful spending as an insignificant detail that intensified or highlighted the real tragedy, which was the famine. For Americans, the prodigal son's sin was that he had no moral foundation for self-discipline and, that most American of phrases, no personal responsibility. But for the Russians, the son's sin was wanting to be self-sufficient apart from his community and family in the first place, and in putting a price tag on his family and choosing to leave them. It was a famine that drove Abram to settle in Egypt, which would set the stage for the formation of Israel and God's redemptive acts. It was a famine that drove Joseph's brothers, the one who had sold him off into slavery, drove them into the land of Egypt, where unbeknownst to them, Joseph was in charge of the food distribution at the time. And it was due to this famine that Joseph and his brothers were reunited and reconciled. Famine means desperation, unimaginable hunger. Famine means utter hopelessness. It means death is right around the corner. Jesus says that this younger brother squanders his birthright on loose living. Now, you'll have to use your imagination and fill in the gaps as what you think loose living is. The bar scene, the club scene, eating brownies and Doritos after midnight, whatever you think loose living is. After a while, the younger brother came to his senses and realized that loose living in a far country turned out to be nothing more than headaches and hangovers. The young man comes to himself and he realizes that the life he thought he could create for himself is not like the life that his father could give him. In light of his misfortune, the young man thinks about how his dad's hired hands have it better than him. He considers how they not only have enough food, they have more than enough. Just the hired servants. So he heads back. Perhaps he considers how he's already talked his dad into giving him his part of the inheritance before the old man is dead. So how hard is it going to be to talk himself back into his father's good graces? So he begins rehearsing a speech in his head to try to win over the old man. Father, I have sinned against thee. I am unworthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. That should do it. And we know the rest of the story. When the father sees the son coming down the road, while the son was still far off, the father leaps off the front porch and sprints down the road to welcome him home. Now, if you or I were that patient father, we would sit on that porch and we would say, they're going to come all the way up here and he better start crawling on his knees. No, this father leaps off the porch and runs to greet his son. The father is so overjoyed, the son doesn't even have time to get out all of his speech. Joy just overflows in this father and son reunion. The father accepts and welcomes the son back, but not according to the terms that the son had wanted, not as a hired hand, but as a son again. It's interesting that at the beginning of the story, the younger son disowns himself from his father, basically declares his father to be dead to him. And at the end of the story, the father reclaims the son as his own and declares him to be alive to him. I think our familiarity with this story blinds us to the shock it would have had on the original listeners and the morals and the communal understandings that bound them as a community. Once we get past the "It's a Wonderful Life" ending that we think this story has, the reality sets in. Because this story doesn't end with, "and they all lived happily ever after." It ends with the family tension heightened even more. It ends with unanswered questions. It leaves us feeling a little bit unsettled. Because out in the fields, as the party starts, out in the fields, overseeing the crops and the hired workers, there's the older brother who hears music and dancing coming from the house. And it is then that he is told that his younger brother has returned and the father has killed the fatted calf and is throwing a huge celebration. In other words, the older brother has been working out in the fields and the father hasn't bothered to send him an invitation to the party. The father hears about the older brother's anger and he comes out to plead with him, to come into the house, to join the party. And notice how the older brother's words reveal his heart when he tells his father, "I have worked like a slave at your side for all these years. I have never run away. I have always obeyed you. I have kept your commands and all of your rules, and not once did I get a party. And now this son of yours comes back, and you treat him like royalty." His words reveal his anger. His words reveal his heart. Because even though he's been at his father's side the whole time, even though he has obeyed everything the father asked of him, this brother, through his words, through his anger, reveals his heart and reveals that he too is lost. The younger brother became lost by running away from home. The other brother stayed home and was just as lost. How sad to be at home and to still be lost. Let's face it, I think this is one of the most dysfunctional families I've ever heard of. The spoiled younger brother demands his share of the inheritance, and the father obliges, no questions asked. And then when the kid blows through all the money on a weekend in Vegas and comes back home after he's maxed out his father's credit cards and wrecked the vintage Jag, he comes home not out of want, he comes home out of need. At least by our standards, this father is an enabler. He knows nothing of tough love, of setting rules and standards for the kid to earn his way back into the house. He doesn't lay out any kinds of expectations or put him on some sort of probationary period. No, it's just full, complete, total welcome with no strings attached. Now, if you apply these same kinds of standards, or rather the apparent lack of standards, to any moral problem or situation, you're going to have chaos. Once any misdeed is done, any prodigal can just simply walk back home, and the fatted calf goes on the grill, and the champagne is opened, and forgiveness is bestowed before any full apology is even offered. Apparently, for this prodigal, the wages of sin is a lavish party. I don't know, is this a story we want to read to our kids and our grandkids? It ends with a dishonored father treating his son like a prince after the kid has blown all the inheritance. It ends with an older brother enraged at seemingly being forgotten and unappreciated. Apparently, the father was so busy doting on Junior and calling the caterers, he forgot to tell his other son who was out working in the fields. While we scold the older brother for being so sour and hard-hearted, the father offers no such scolding to the older brother. He only has words of love and welcome for both of his sons. To the one, he says, "Welcome home, you're my son again." And to the other, he says, "You're always with me, and everything that I have is yours." In the end, he refuses to choose between his children. Both are his. Both are always with him. And both have everything that is his. By the end of the story, we have more questions. Did the older brother swallow his pride and come back into the house and join in the party? Did the two brothers reunite and reconcile and settle their differences? Did the younger brother mend his ways and live a good life of obedience to his father like his older brother? And where is the prodigal mother in this story? Another question is, who is the real prodigal in this parable? Tradition calls this the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal is a word that means excessive, over the top, and it certainly describes the actions of the younger son who took his inheritance and blew it all away. But prodigal also describes the actions of the father, whose over-the-top welcoming of his son was so excessive it was scandalous. In any biblical story, we try to figure out which character do we resonate with the most. Where do we locate ourselves in this text? And with this particular parable, we can see ourselves in any member of the family. If you're a parent of more than one child, you know what it's like to try to appease two siblings. And who among us hasn't gotten angry at someone else who flaunted authority, who broke the law, who disobeyed the rules, and still got the promotion? Amen. Yeah. And what young person doesn't want to join the younger brother and tell the old man and the old lady to go jump off a bridge, fly the coop prematurely, seek their own identity apart from their family, even if it's risky and dangerous? But let us note that the major issue in this family, the thing that is the source of indignation and fury, is not the younger brother's decision to run away, or his wasting his inheritance, or even his decision to come home. No, the most offensive thing in this story is the father's open-handed, no strings attached, love you no matter what kind of love, and welcome. It's the father's outrageous act of grace that puts all of the burden of the happy ending squarely on the shoulders of the older brother. And now the older brother has to make a choice. Either he can present his airtight case against his younger brother and the volumes and the mountains of evidence against him to his father as to why his brother is undeserving of being welcomed back and reinstated into the family. He can do that, or he can choose to go back into the house, quietly take his place at the table across from his brother, who got something he never deserved for doing something the older brother would never do. By going to the party and embracing his brother as his brother and rejoicing with the others, the older brother risks condoning not his brother's outrageous behavior, but his father's outrageous love. Writer and author Robert Brown Taylor says that because of the father's love, the older brother has a choice to make. Either he can be right or he can be a family. He can be right or he can be a family. That's a tough choice that we have to make sometimes too, isn't it? Now, we don't want to send the wrong message. Choices should have consequences, and people need to pay for them. We don't want grace handed out so freely and unreservedly. We are quite suspicious of forgiveness with no limits and grace without boundaries. That is, until we find ourselves walking down some prodigal road. And we look and we see that the old man is running towards us with arms wide open and tears in his eyes. And he doesn't care about our prepared apology or the rehearsed speech. He just rejoices that we've come home. I don't know if Jesus told this story for us to figure out, well, which character are we? Maybe this story is not about us. Maybe this story is about a reckless, scandalous, prodigal God who welcomes home people like us. Thanks be to God. Amen.